Übertragung hat gestartet. Perfect. So, welcome everyone to our first panel discussion hosted by and organized by Economics. It's a pleasure for us to really kick off our first event in a series of events we actually plan to broadcast within the next month. My name is Felix Wagner, and I will guide you through this event within the next 60 minutes. First of all, thank you very much to the team and especially Antonia for organizing this today. As it is our first one, as I said, she put quite a lot of hard work during the last day to make this event actually happen. But now I'm really happy to welcome our outstanding panel consisting of 4 persons who truly understand e-mobility and especially its implications from very different perspective. And this is also what today's topic is about. So often when speaking about e-mobility, we only talk about the emissions saved during the road operations. But the bigger picture of production, reuse, and recycling is often forgotten. Since the battery of an electric vehicle is the most valuable part with up to 60% of its cost, and also a major share of emissions emitted within the production, we would like to draw some attention on the impact of EV batteries within our panel today. So, who are our panelists today? We have today with us Dr. Peter Mertens. I'm happy to have you here. Peter worked for the last 35 years within the automotive industry, working as a member of the management board for Audi, for example, also as a CTO of Volvo Car, and as an executive for General Motors. Since 2020, Peter is heavily supporting the startup industry by investing and advising promising startups within the mobility ecosystem. So it's a pleasure to have you here today, Peter.
Thank you.
Secondly, we have Niels Steinbrecher from TES with us. Niels brings several years experience within the sustainable solution industry, working for companies like DuPont and VDE Renewables in Singapore. Since 2021, he is Managing Director of TES Sustainable Battery Solutions for the APAC and EMEA region. TES is a leading lifecycle solution provider with outstanding experience within e-waste and battery waste recycling. Happy to have you here today, Niels.
Excellent, thank you. Excited.
Perfect. We need some excitement here today. And third speaker will be Nikola Vikic. Nikola has a background in geology. In 2019, he joined the think tank of Karlsruhe Institute of Technology as a research associate, working on the global supply chain of battery raw materials. Since 2020, he joined McKinsey Company as a senior analyst for battery insights. So really happy to have you here today.
Happy to be here.
And last but not least, we have Tilman Fahle. He's a senior manager and lead for circular batteries at Systemic. Systemic is a think and do tank. That's what we learned, not just thinking, but also doing. That's very important. And for Sustainable Project, and in April this year, they started to lead the Battery Pass project funded by the Federal Ministry of Economics and Climate Protection, together with 11 other leading companies from the industry, for example, Audi, BMW, and BASF. Really happy to have you here today, Tilman.
Great to be here. I'm excited, Felix.
Perfect. So now, since we all know who is here, and since we know who can give us very valuable input, I will share just some insights of how the structure of our panel discussion will take place. So all these 4 speakers will get 2 minutes to present one key message regarding the topic I just mentioned. And we will then have 2 to 3 questions for each speaker to answer. But of course, we also invite every participant and every one on YouTube to join and type in questions in the comments. And we will, at the end, when we are done with all 4 speakers and the questions, we will have like an overall discussions within the panel, but also with the audience, and to answer more questions coming from the audience. So that's how we will proceed today. Any questions from the panel so far? If not, then yeah, we can start kicking off by Peter to present his key message, and yeah, really looking forward to what you guys want to share with us.
Thank you, Felix. All right. If we look at the mobility of the future, the e-mobility is really finally taking off and getting much further and stronger growth rates than we were anticipating. Actually, you can argue whether that's because of finally there is a good offer of products, or it's driven by demand and by really the awareness of sustainability and e-mobility being a big part of that. That's the good part of the message. The bad part of the story is raw materials, precious metals are getting extremely expensive, and are also, at least some of those materials like cobalt, being mined in under conditions and in countries which we would all love to see not being part of the equation, and that's sort of a contradiction of what is ongoing right now. What has happened also during the crisis we have had, during chip crisis, etc., OEMs were able and used that shortage in supply actually in increasing prices significantly. So they right now are coping with the increase of material costs by increasing prices. This comes to an end very soon, because cars need to be affordable, and we all know that electric vehicles are still significantly more expensive than combustion engine vehicles. So what we need is actually an ecosystem where each and every of the components are related to the others and are making sure that the cars and the batteries being delivered to customers will be part of a second life, a third life, and are going to be part of the material chain for new batteries, at least with 30% of raw materials coming from recycling. So each of those components go into a strong relationship, and it is supported right now also by a political push towards sustainability and renewable energy, solar and wind mainly, which will drive a very much higher demand on local storage at households to support this initiative on having solar energy almost on each and every house. So that in total describes there's big growth coming. We need to have an ecosystem to make sure we reuse batteries, refurbish batteries, and make sure we get 30% minimum raw material back from recycled batteries. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Peter. One question would be, I mean, different studies say that we will have about 3.4 million used battery packs to be managed already in 2025. I mean, we already have more or less 2022 is over. Of course, there's still a little bit left, but to bring it to the point, there's not much time left until the OEMs actually have to manage those 3.4 million batteries. What are your thoughts, or what do you see? How ready is the automotive industry and the car manufacturers for that, especially considering second life?
Yeah, I think it very much depends. There is obviously some OEMs getting prepared, but I would say as a big picture and 30,000 feet view, I would say they are not ready. Most of the OEMs have done some studies and some research, and sometimes even invested into recycling. Very little has been achieved on second and third life. And to be honest, I don't really see OEMs being ready for that. They still struggle with selling cars, frankly speaking. Now with having a dealership or many dealers that needs to be supported, then online, and then also other kinds of let's say sales approach towards their cars. I do not see them really heavily being engaged in second life, selling batteries to utilities or even to households. That's not going to happen. it needs a bridge towards the reuse and the recycling of batteries.
Yeah, I understand. And I mean, as you said, most of the OEMs actually already start preparing at least some strategies on how to tackle this. What's your opinion on this? So, I mean, there are different approaches. There are sometimes one-to-one relationships that the large OEMs are trying to establish. Some OEMs, like Tesla, have a different approach, like a closed loop, internal closed loop. Some OEMs are actually building up new ventures or buying new companies to tackle those problems. So how would you describe the different approaches, and which strategy would be, from your perspective, the best one for the majority of the OEMs?
Yeah, if you look at it, it's actually 3 different models. Tesla is really keeping this as a closed loop. Tesla is a different animal in every respect. So I would put that aside for the time being. Not sure whether that's the right model for the rest of the pack. Companies like VW, with almost like 10 million vehicles per year, think that they can manage it on their own. I think it's a misperception of the complexity and the effort needed. And the third one is that most of the OEMs will rely on third-party support, like Circonomics, having analytics, having then the marketplace to be trading batteries, second, third life, and then also having the users for second and third life batteries and recycling on the other end of the value chain. This will be creating significant economies of scale, and that is supposed to be, at least from my opinion, very clearly the model for the future. So join forces, do one big effort in bringing in as many OEMs and other users of lithium-ion batteries, and then we will really gain the highest economies of scale.
Perfect, thanks. Well, one key takeaway is the OEMs need an ecosystem. That's what I would like to take away from the first points by Peter. And ecosystem is also, I would say, a good point to hand over to Niels, because Niels from TES is also showing us their approach about how this kind of ecosystem could look like and what role TES would play in such an ecosystem. So Niels, stage is yours.
Yeah, thank you so much, Felix, for the introduction. I want to start with one of my favorite quotes from a very famous automotive person in Germany. His name is Gottfried Daimler. As you know, he's inventor and founder of Daimler, today Daimler-Benz. And he said once that the global demand for automobiles will not surpass 1 million. Does anyone know on the panel why he thought so? Well, I will give you the answer, even if you know. If for nothing else, due to the lack of chauffeurs, right? So he assumed that the number of chauffeurs will be limited, meaning the drivers to drive people around. So the automotives will never pass 1 million. Why I say that, it's similar with electromobility, right? A lot of people said not too long ago in Germany that the EVs will never come, right? And now people say that second life will never come, right? So if I talk to my daughters, I have 3, about cars, they always ask me, Daddy, why can't you get a Tesla, right? And I said, sorry, I'm driving a BMW. So there is something happening here, which my just predecessor mentioned, which is different from what has been before, and a lot of things are changing, right? So we are in that together, right, in this quickly changing environment. And as you see on the slide here from TES, it is about the full value chain, which is new, right? We have new materials coming in from the mining. We have new equipment like batteries, which we did not have the last 100 years in Germany. from lithium ion, right? We have the OEMs, obviously, right, which drive very quickly. And I think my personal reason why this is happening so quickly in Europe and globally is because of Tesla, right? Not so much because everyone thought that's a good idea. It's pretty much a competition, right? Who is driving this? And then you have at the end of this value chain, you have the second life users, as we see it, right? So we as TES, we have the 4R strategy, we call it. We look in how we can actually help to repair and remanufacture. That's the first one. In the middle, the orange one, repair and manufacture batteries so they get back into the first life, which makes sense, right? Extend the life of the battery as much as possible. We had received batteries from BYD in Singapore, for example, where a lot of them had missing cables or missing parts, and they could be actually relatively quickly repaired, not going down to cell level or anything else, by just exchanging some parts, right? And that's the first part for us and the sustainability of this. The second one is the repurpose and reuse, right? That's why we work together with Circonomics. So we feel and believe that it will be difficult for OEMs to not reuse batteries at some point, right? There was a famous case in Germany about Nike not too long ago, where NGOs found out that they just shred all the new shoes they get back from clients, which just have not the right size. And there was a bit outcry. And how can you do that, right? How can you not be more sustainable and reuse good material, good product with the challenging environment we have? So similar, I think, even on the marketing side, the OEMs cannot allow themselves in the end to just recycle and not use batteries again when they're still good batteries, right? The NGOs will definitely find that out at some point. It's maybe my personal view, but I think on top of where the European Commission is driving as well, second life, this has to come, even if the OEMs today are still a bit reluctant. Yeah, and the third and fourth R we have here is really recycle and recover. Recycle meaning mechanical treatment and creating black mass, which is the value in the battery, right? So you take out all the plastics, all the metals, and other material you will not need to make new batteries. And this material black mass is then further refined in our case in a hydrometallurgical process, where you can get out close to new material, right? You get out cobalt hydroxide, lithium carbonate, and graphite and other material, which then is again put into the pre-manufacturing of batteries. And just to give you an example, it sounds a bit complicated maybe. So we have, and you have probably in your hand, one of those mobile phones. We have a client, a very big one, who is producing mobile phones. A large amount of those mobile phones go into our recycling plant in Singapore. They are treated there, and we sell the cobalt hydroxide to China. And in China, it took a while to get a license, but it was accepted as a raw material, not as a waste. And that material is then produced into active material, precursor material, and goes directly back to that same mobile phone company, which is producing new batteries by this recycling process, right? So that's enough for the summary, I think. That's what we do. We help clients closing the loop and really driving the circular economy by doing so.
Perfect. Yeah, great. Thanks. I mean, very interesting what you guys are already doing in other industries, as you just mentioned, mobile phones, for example. As we know, the automotive industry is always a little bit different. How do you see the willingness of OEMs actually of providing data that is actually necessary to actually drive these ecosystem? And what kind of data do you actually need to actually work efficiently within like a circular economy from your perspective?
Yeah. So we are part of the Global Battery Alliance as TES as a company, and me being a member there. And we speak for the second life users of batteries as well as for the recyclers. And obviously, to be efficient, we need information about the batteries. And we need a lot of information, right? As a recycler, you want to know exactly what's in the battery, right? And what probably was the problem before with the battery. And as a Second Life, you know better, Felix, you also want to know as much as possible about the lifetime of that battery. And definitely the European battery passport is requiring that. And we hope and we fight for that in the Global Battery Alliance to actually get a mandatory requirement to everyone who is bringing batteries to the market to have that battery passport, right? Apart from that legal requirement, I doubt that the companies will do on their own. They might do it on their own projects, but there is also, for confidentiality and other reasons, there's a reluctancy to share data at the moment. And also, someone told me, and I believe in that, and maybe others or Peter can agree to that or not. But the future car is relatively simple to build, right? And soon the Chinese cars will be on the market at a very low price. So in other words, the chassis and the outside can be built by anyone. The electric engine is relatively simple, but the current IP is pretty much in the battery, right? So where the future cars will actually have something which differentiates them from another, right? A Tesla from a Mercedes or from an Audi will be very much in the battery. So there's a natural secrecy, obviously, about how the battery is and how the battery performs and what information I have about those batteries. Because we don't want that to have in the competition, right? So maybe that's my long answer to a short question.
Yeah, that's good. I like long answers. Well, to just some insight here. One of our speakers and following speakers will also give us some more insights on the whole battery passport topic. So just stay tuned, and you will find out some more infos about that later.
Quickly, if I may, Felix, just
Sure.
quickly building on what Niels was saying, exactly. It's not only the battery, of course, that makes the differentiation. It's the battery management system to really know how you use the battery in the best possible way to have longest lasting and range and all of that. And yes, you're spot on. BYD has announced today that they're going to be on German market, launching their vehicles still this year.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, this brings me to another question. I mean, you as a recycler, and I mean, of course, you mentioned here in your ecosystem that you are not just recycling batteries, but you are also helping the OEMs actually to repurpose these batteries and also bring them into second life. But how do you see the decision-making process on what to do with the battery when it actually hits the workshops or the warehouses of the OEMs again? So how should they make actually a decision on what to do with the battery, whether it should be recycled or whether it should be reused in second life? What's your perspective on this?
Yeah, in the best case, there is a battery passport for all others who receive the batteries. Obviously, if the OEM themselves receive the batteries, that's relatively easy because likely they will have access to everything they want because they know the codes for the BMS and whatever, right? So they have all the data of the battery, and hopefully from that data can draw back on the quality of the battery and hopefully on the state of health as well. The second part, the plan B, is kind of having efficient, fast testing for batteries. Currently, testing of a battery or a model still takes 4 to 6 hours or sometimes 8 hours, right? So that's not efficient. That takes too long. But there are a lot of players out there who have fast testing equipment, which again, for larger volumes of models makes sense, right? If you have like 1,000 same models, you kind of can test 10 of them and align your fast testing system. And the other 90, you can actually run through in less than a second for a model to test those batteries and define the state of health. So in that sense, yeah, these are the two things, right? Getting as much data as possible and then having efficient testing methods. But again, the OEMs probably just rely on their own data.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, very interesting insights. We can further discuss this later on with the whole crowd in our overall discussion at the end. So it's time to move on to our next speaker. Thanks, Niels. And yeah, welcome on stage, Nicola.
Thank you, Felix. Happy to take it from here. Yeah. So let me start by saying that we all basically know that the EV battery market is going to be a very dynamic space. We expect that 60% of all new vehicle sales by 2030 will be electric vehicles. And all those EVs will eventually reach their end of life together with their packs. And they will have to be appropriately handled in a most sustainable and economic way. And if you couple this fact with the clear obligation to recycle, the need for an effective recycling infrastructure that is capable to capture the value of all of those batteries that we find in all of those battery packs will be inevitable. But how many batteries are we exactly expecting? We can see this here on the left-hand side of this slide. There's going to be several million tons of available material for recycling coming from batteries in the upcoming years. And it's in fact growing by 20%. And a very interesting point in time is going to be 2030, when end-of-life battery packs start overtaking production scrap as the main feedstock on the market. And that already implies the very first and probably the most important success factor in this market, which is if I want to participate in this market today, I need to start locking up feedstock. And how do I do this? I do this by partnering up with the producers of the production scrap, so all the gigafactories, so the cell producers and the OEMs. And this is already, in fact, happening on the market, right? We've seen multiple partnerships being already formed. For example, Li-Cycle and LG is one good example in the US. But we've also seen, for instance, Redwood partnering up with Volkswagen, or in Europe, Primobius and Daimler, right? And now that we know that there's going to be enough material on the market, the next key question that needs to be raised is it going to be economical to recycle all of that material? And in our view, that definitely will be. It's going to be economical. In fact, you will be able to probably achieve a profit margin above 20%. But that depends on a number of different key metrics, right? For instance, the metals prices, the recovery rate of those metals, but also cost factors such as, for instance, the utilization of your plant. So how well are you using your invested capital, right? And the logistical setup. So what are my logistics costs? And all those factors imply success factor number 2 and success factor number 3. Success factor number 2 being strategic partnerships. What do we mean by this? Different entities often have different core capabilities. And if you merge those core capabilities, you can create synergies between them, which result in cost reductions. An absolute no-brainer in the recycling business is to partner up with someone who's very good in the logistical part of this business, right? And we've seen this already happening quite a lot in this market. Good examples would be Suez and Eramet, or Solvay and Veolia, both European examples. A good US example would be, for instance, Redwood, who've partnered up with multiple waste management companies. The last success factor, which is the process excellence, means basically I need to make sure that I maximize the recovery rate of my metals, because otherwise I'm literally leaving money on the table, and no one wants that. So I need to pick the right process. I need to make sure it's robust, and I need to make sure it's running smoothly over the years. And if I pay close attention to all those 3 success factors, I can be a very successful participant in this huge $6 billion market, and I can contribute to the creation of a truly circular economy in the upcoming years. Thank you very much.
Great insights. Thank you, Nicola. I mean, you mentioned 7.3 kilotons of recycling material already there to be recycled in 2040. What is your perception? Is the scaling of those recycling capacity happening at the same speed, or how big is the gap between waste and recycling capacity currently, and will the recycling capacity actually speed up to close this gap?
I think it depends a bit on the market you look at, but in Europe, we have seen over 20 announcements on the recycling side in just the past few years, right? And it's more than enough to capture all that's coming by 2030. So I think the contrary is the case. Not everyone will survive in this market. Not everyone will have enough access to feedstock. And it's only a few big guys who have actually captured enough share who are going to survive the first period. And then you will see the second wave of end-of-life batteries coming into place, which is going to be a second entry point. But of course, those guys won't have the first mover advantage that the others who entered the market early on will have.
Mm-hmm. So you are saying we won't have any shortage within the next 10 to 15 years in recycling capacity?
No, don't think so.
That's good to know. You are mainly focusing on your slide on recycling, and we also see that the industry, for especially the automotive OEMs, are currently focusing on recycling those batteries. But do you have a prediction on how the relationship between end-of-life batteries for recycling and end-of-life batteries for second life will change?
I think that Niels touched upon this quite nicely already, right? There is going to be a few variables that are going to determine which pathway a battery will take. State of health is an obvious one. Residual capacity is another one, and of course the internal chemistry. And it is our belief basically that at least until 2030, metal prices will stay fairly high, which means that any nickel-based battery will rather go into recycling than into a reuse case, because OEMs and cell producers will need those materials back at some point in time. Whereas LFP is something that is more prone to be in a second life case, particularly because it has exceptional cycle life stability, right? Which is also getting better and better. So it's really a matter of the metal prices as well as the performance of those batteries going forward, right? We've heard things about 1 million-mile battery. This might change the entire perspective on recycling versus second life again. So it's all these variables that will basically determine which pathway a battery will go.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, perfect. Yeah, thanks. Well, thanks for your insights. I think there are still quite a few things we can talk about in the overall discussion at the end. I just saw that we also got our first questions to you, Nicola, from the audience. But as I mentioned, we picked them up at the end. So Magnus, thanks for your question. I saw it, and we will pick up on this in a few minutes. So then thanks again. Then it's time to move on to Tilman, the last speaker in our session today. And yeah, the word is yours.
Thank you, Felix. Thanks for the opportunity for joining the panel today. I'm going to be speaking, as Felix alluded to earlier, about the battery passport and especially the iteration that the Systemic is leading, the Battery Pass project, which is funded by the Ministry for Economic Affairs and Climate Protection. Battery passports, I think it's a term that has been quite prominent in the last years, especially promoted by the Global Battery Alliance, that great World Economic Forum initiated multi-stakeholder consortium that really aims to use digital tracking and tracing, digital technologies to support the creation of a sustainable ramp-up of a battery industry globally. And while the Global Battery Alliance has pioneered this, what is probably the most important milestone and an element for the creation of that battery passport ecosystem, as Niels pointed out, the voluntary contribution of these partly sensitive data is not something that would happen on its own, and so the most relevant element that drives us forward is at present the EU battery regulation, a new law coming from the European Union that is currently being finalized, that will require a battery passport for every large battery, every battery that is larger than 2 kilowatt hours, coming to the European market starting 2026, which in terms of industrial scale up is essentially tomorrow. As you all know, it takes some time to get this system set up and then also integrated into the manufacturing processes and ecosystems. And so Systemic, together with a range of partners, among which, as Felix mentioned, BASF, Audi, Fraunhofer Institute, Architect, Twice Circular, Mercedes, GS1, RWE, and also the Global Battery Alliance, by the way. We are working hard to create content and technical standards and guidances for industry to allow companies to make this happen, and basically support a cohesive and interoperable system that is non-competitive and actually allows an efficient way of putting this into practice at low cost and high efficiency. But what does the battery passport actually mean? So according to the EU regulation, there's going to be two elements: an electronic exchange system and a battery passport. And the EES, the electronic exchange system, is essentially the macro, you could say, macroeconomic platform that will register the publicly available information for each of the battery models, and the battery passport will link to the individual batteries to make that data available for each individual battery, including battery composition, responsible sourcing, carbon footprint, recycled content, and so on. And so that brings us to our circular economy discussion in a second. And so we think that the value of the battery passport really is great across all dimensions of sustainability, both from an economic perspective, socioeconomic value, and also business value, as a bunch of several of the other speakers pointed out, to get the testing efficiently, to get the handling efficient, to really make a circular economy happen.
So perfect. Yeah, great overview. Definitely. I think there's a lot already happening in from the regulatory perspective. You described that the passport actually combines different data sets. From your perspective, what data is required to make the battery passport 100% successful?
Well, I think for one, every stakeholder or every company, in fact, that is participating has their own definition of what success means, right? Like for Systemic, as a change-making company, I mean, our own sole purpose is to drive basically a 1.5 degree aligned circular transition of global economies. And so, of course, for us, the success would be that it supports an efficient circular economy, supports economics of battery electric vehicles, and makes sure that the sourcing, Peter pointed this out in the very beginning, of these materials that are required for the millions of batteries that we'll need is done as benign as possible. And of course, there will be an impact, all right? So every human activity has an environmental impact and has social implications. And especially with the extraction phase, it's very important that we reinvent mining as well, right? That we, in this massive ramp up of several of the metal sections here, lithium, cobalt, nickel, and many more, that we make this as responsible and environmentally benign as possible. But then also don't let this become a hurdle to the incredibly necessary decarbonization of the mobility sector, since there's a third of the global carbon emissions. So it's battery electric vehicle really is the one thing that can decarbonize that fast. And the data in the battery passport, I mentioned a few on the materials composition, responsible sourcing, carbon footprinting, recycling content, and how to handle the battery safely. These are really, really important to be part of this and be available to the economic operators. They can use them, and the public also, to make sure that it's done responsibly, so that this can actually take place. Yeah.
Understand. I mean, totally agree. I think everyone agrees that the battery passport initiative is definitely an important step towards standardization and more transparency within the whole supply chain. From 2026 on, every battery with more than 2 kWh capacity is obligated to have such a battery passport due to new regulation. What do you think is the next step on how the EU can furtherly support the circular economy?
So what I really appreciated in the perspectives of all of Peter, Niels, and Nicola was that I think we have a joint perspective that circular economy is so much more than recycling, right? Ultimately, every battery and all the battery material should be recycled, and of course by EU law and also US and Chinese law, by the way, this is already mandated and should take place. Now it's a question how we set this up, right? Like, will it become a cost burden to handle the batteries responsibly during lifetime, or is there a business case in it? And Nicola nicely pointed out that there really can be a business case in it. Besides that recycling element, second life, very important, but even during lifetime, the integration of batteries in a renewable power grid is super important, right? Since the use of the power during use of a battery during driving really determines a large part of the environmental footprint. And what is currently still lacking is that integration into a green power grid and charging grid infrastructure. There's some action happening at the EU level, but so far it's incredibly fragmented, essentially national laws and loads of complexity in these markets that battery, like even just regular battery chargers are built at this very, very expensive and hard to scale up. But ideally, all these batteries on wheels would be used also to charge bidirectionally and support the saving and storing the renewables as they come into the grid and balance the grid out as we have more variability. And that is something where we clearly need more regulatory action. Germany's taken a first step recently to enable that, but that's really just a tiny step and needs basically consistently done across the entire EU market. And then, same for US and other markets where electric cars come into place.
What do you think is the biggest hurdle here? I mean, by bringing batteries from the first life, mainly from electric vehicles, into a second life, using them in like energy storage systems, what do you think is currently the largest hurdle here?
Well, I think right now is a lack of scale, because to get this done efficiently, you'll have to have a industrialized operation, right? And need efficient testing, efficient assessment of safety, especially. We need to keep in mind that a car battery, when you put it into a stationary use, it ceases to be a car battery and becomes a stationary battery, right? So it's legally, it becomes a different product. And so what you need to do is you need to recertify it for safety, for performance, like CE marking that we know on all our electric gadgets. And that requires quite detailed analytics, and it's quite hard to do on a heterogeneous amount of incoming products, right? Like if you don't know what the product does, recertifying it for another product use is not trivial. And so getting that scaled up just need more mass of batteries and more efficient technologies, and it's pointed to a few. And with that done, I think there can be a growing market for second life batteries, as Nicola pointed out, once the material prices and costs of raw materials decreases again in the 2030s.
Okay, I understand. Yeah, well, thanks for your insight. Very, very good to understand what is currently happening, also from a regulatory perspective. And this would be it for Peter. Do you want to say something?
No. I was just listening. The only comment I would like to make is all the volume assumptions we saw, I would rather consider them to be conservative. I would assume that especially what we're seeing right now, especially in Europe, that penetrations for electric vehicles will grow faster than expected. Maybe not in the US, but certainly in Europe, and very likely also in China.
Well.
Yeah, maybe building on that, also what Nicholas had shared, right? We also made our own assumptions as a business case for a recycler, right? We want to know how much batteries on the market, right? To see whether we want to invest and where to invest. We see a tendency that batteries actually hold much longer in the end of life than earlier expected. And they might even be there 20 years, right? I mean, my father drives now an E3 for plus 10 years, and there's no need to do anything with the battery. And if he keeps on doing it as a bigger basket to go shopping, it will last 20 years, right? That's one. And most people don't drive so much. And second, the production scrap, we feel it's kind of changing hands in 2030 maybe, right? So a bit later than what you had expected, right? That battery scrap will be less than the end-of-life batteries for recycling. But never mind, I agree with Peter. It will be a lot coming to the market, and it will be a challenge.
Yeah, perfect. I like it that the overall discussion is already starting. I don't need to ask questions here. That's perfect. That's what I want. That's how a panel discussion should look like. If you don't have any points on building up on what Niels just said, I still have another question for you guys. I mean, Europe depends currently quite a lot on Asia when it comes to battery production. What do you think from a sustainability perspective? How does this reliance influence the sustainability impact?
Maybe
to all of you guys, whoever wants to say something.
Let me give it a start.
Go
Let
ahead.
me give it a go. So, and actually, this matches neatly to the response the addition that I wanted to give to Niels' point. Right, I fully agree that the ramp up that we see or expect, like the projections on the market uptake, are probably conservative today, as you pointed out, Peter. But there's of course a constraint in the raw materials, right? Like how many batteries can we actually realistically produce with the materials that we have, and like starting a new mine, exploring new resources, start getting the permits, setting up the processes, and actually getting the quality you need, putting that to the market, is a very difficult business. And we work, for example, with the International Council for Metals and Mining, ICMM, that is a conglomerate of large mining industries. And they really point out, they're struggling to get this up faster than they had planned, even though the prices are higher now. But there's some limits to how fast they can be, right? So ultimately, will it be fast enough in the 20s? That'll be very interesting to see. But nonetheless, it's much faster than even a year ago. Even the optimists considered. Yeah, and needless to say, the more conservative perspectives. And so it's going to come up, but the raw materials will be the bottleneck. And so it's great that you point out the dependency on China. That is a criticism maybe that is, especially in the German discourse for sure, is becoming quite prominent, that people say we shouldn't get into dependency on China, and that of course on the one hand is correct. On the other hand, it's also a matter of industrial strategy, that we invest, just as China has done for the last 10 years, into the mining access and to the refining capacities also in Europe, right? And to onshore these capacities and these skills that we offshored for the last decades. And so I think that is something that we certainly see also in the political realm, and as well as industrial, that there's that move that has already started to onshore that to Europe. And refining of materials isn't something that is geographically bound, right? We could do it just the same in Europe, because it's not bound by the geological resources that are placed elsewhere in the world. And to get that sustainability done, for sure, right now the requirements in the EU are more strict than elsewhere in the world, and so that would be better to have that done in Europe short term. But we should also keep in mind that like China is revolutionizing the energy system faster. Like they put up more wind power in 1 year than the global installed wind power is in stock right now, for every year. China is incredibly fast in greening their operations, so we should not kid ourselves that in 5 to 10 years that green advantage of Europe might very quickly dissolve, which is great for the world and for the people. But thinking of it as a USP of Europe might be a bit optimistic, and so rather we should think of it as a global push to that direction.
Definitely.
I can, from my perspective and being really critical with our industry, the automotive industry, I think we have missed out almost all global trends late the last 20 years. And of course, we missed out on the battery side, big time. And that's firing back. And we are in dependency on Asia. It's Japan, it's Korea, it's very much China. And we have to break this through. We need to be back in the game. By the way, it's not different to the US. Tesla is as much dependent on Asian suppliers as Volvo or Audi or BMW or VW. But again, the only very good lighthouse example of things can be done in Europe is Peter Carlson with Northvolt coming into play very, very, very late, actually almost too late, but at least proving that it is possible to do, to have mining and development and production of battery cells in Europe, actually in Kiruna, very much using water energy to almost have a complete sustainable setup, much more sustainable than any other battery factory around the world. So we have missed out 10, 15 years. We need to catch up. Question is, what is next in technology? Is it solid state or not? If it was solid state, then we need to get our act together, because there also most of the research patents and IP is outside of Europe. It's in Japan, and it's in the US.
Maybe two things to add, because the question was also on sustainability. I think it's very seldom that the energy security, which kind of I extend now to the mining raw material security, is actually aligned with sustainability, right? I mean, we see it in the Ukraine challenge we have now, that energy security brings us away from sustainability, right? Because we bring coal and other stuff back. But here for the batteries, it looks like because we have that gap of the material and we want to do urban mining, we actually support sustainability, right? So the EU is very strongly supporting to keep the material in the European Union. We had Mr. Timmermans, the Vice President of the European Commission, being in Rotterdam at our new site some weeks ago. And it was very clear that they will close all loopholes, right, for the battery material to actually exit Europe, as keeping it on the security side, but at the same time, obviously, that supports sustainability, right? So that's great. And the second point is probably China as well. I mean, there was obviously in the past always a challenge of trusting China products and Chinese in general, right? And now the OEMs in Europe actually had to trust them because they had no own batteries, right? I think plus 90% of the batteries still come from China. And I think that also relates back to Second Life, because it's a trust issue, right? And if I don't produce my battery myself and don't have enough experience with them, then I don't trust others to continue using it, right? So I think that trust just needs more time, right? To trust those models or cells which are produced in China, right? Not many have been more than 10 years in the car yet. But I think it will take a few more years till that trust is building up, that those batteries are actually holding much longer than probably one expected, or people just didn't know how good the batteries are, right? So that's maybe one additional point to the trust, the gap of trust still on a Second Life, that those batteries were actually not produced directly by the OEMs here, but were produced by others somewhere.
Can I build up just a bit on this? Just a few sentences.
Last sentence from you, and then we definitely have to take care also about some questions coming from the audience, because I'm really happy that we actually get questions from the audience. So we definitely have to.
No, I'll keep it short.
Perfect.
Keep it short. So in general, you're right. We see a huge dependency from China on all levels. I think it's getting most aggressively tackled on the cell production level. We've seen over 30 gigafactories being announced only in Europe. It corresponds to over a terawatt hour of production. If you compare this to our demand side projections, we would be self-sufficient if all of that gets online, which of course it won't, right? It will depend on the capital investments that need to be taken, etc. So some of these players won't actually be successful in this. But there's the other elements. There's the cathode active material production. There's the raw material side. We see activity there, but not as aggressive as on the cell level. But it's happening. So, and we see players going into the most sustainable direction, right? Like Northvolt, that example has been mentioned. And I think the next very important step for the EU as a region is to protect that, because the most cheapest cells are coming from China. And we need to make sure that the industry is capable to survive with this competition. And here is the point where something like a carbon border tax comes into play, right? If you use unsustainable materials, well, you've got to pay a tax for that within the EU, because our cells here that we produce, they're a different standard, right? And we only accept this type of standard. It also goes into things like, because we're talking about recycling, into design for recycling. I, for instance, would love to see, and in the information outlined in the battery passport, the design to recycling metrics. What type of binder have you used? What's the separator? These are critical information for the recyclers, because it will determine how economical it will be to recycle that battery. It will ultimately determine the recovery rates of the metals. So these things need to be incorporated. We need to come together as an industry and formulate all these information that need to be on the battery passport, but also on the border, basically to say, okay, this is what we're going to accept, and this is where you got to pay a tax in order to protect the own industry that is being established as we speak.
Yeah, no, definitely very good point. I think we could speak another at least hour about the regulatory requirements, and I think we also from economics do have quite a perspective on this. But as I said right at the beginning, it's just the first panel discussion in a series of discussions we would like to broadcast within the next month. So we can definitely pick up on some of the questions we still need to clarify. But as I mentioned, I would like to bring in some questions from the audience. And I think there's one very interesting one that actually is not just questioning about the perspective from an industry perspective, but also from the car owners and consumers. And Magnus is asking, especially to you, Tilman, thanks for the insight. Perhaps to take a different angle, how would you say consumers, for example, car owners, benefit from increasing circular economy regulation, especially in mobility or beyond?
Yeah, so that is a great question, and I think it's, I guess, as sustainability professionals, like the panelists here, we've kind of seen a situation that we have right now with a constraint on gas, kind of coming through different reasons, obviously, but in the long term, that fossil resources get hopefully more expensive and more restrained, that we need a more efficient way of living overall, including mobility. And I think Magnus also pointed out to mobility as a service and car sharing or mobility services, like a more resource efficient and more environmentally efficient way of providing all the needs that we have as humans, and including mobility, is so urgently necessary, right? And circular economy as a means of making better use of those materials and of the energy embedded in the cars, really could enable a way more affordable and a way less dependent mobility system. And what we see right now, if you want to buy an electric car, you'll have a wait list of 2 years. With fuel prices shooting up, gas prices shooting up, there is for the first time a real question. Will we have resources to heat our homes, to fuel our cars, right? And sort of a more resource independent economy will ultimately secure our mobility that we want to have in our lifestyle, right? So in the medium to long term, this is inevitable to allow us to keep our lifestyle in an affordable way and essentially have a running system. So I think that is a massive advantage for society and all the consumers.
Yeah, very good point.
And maybe just to add a quick moment as a sustainability expert as well. In the end, everyone has his own carbon footprint, all right, or environmental footprint. You can actually calculate, and you have a choice, right? What vehicle you use, what energy you use, right? You buy a green electricity or not, and similar with a car, right? So I think it has a huge advantage if you are able to get the green energy and have an electric car, which is produced by batteries which have been produced sustainable. And then you potentially can be carbon zero, right, as an individual, which I think is a great thing to achieve, which normally with a normal car you can never achieve.
Yep, definitely. I personally, I also have an electric vehicle. I have my solar farm on the roof. The sun is shining here. I'm currently just fueling my car with solar energy. It's just great. It's also, from a personal feeling that you are actually doing something and beginning to do something. It's really great to start somewhere, and I think there's a lot we can all achieve if we all have the same goal, and that we all at least have the same understanding that we need to do something. Tilman just mentioned, I think it will be the first winter where we really have to think about whether we will have enough energy to heat up our homes. For me, again, it's actually quite easy. I have a heat pump with solar on the roof. It's a good system, but I think there are more people that need to think about these solutions, and that we really need to implement them. And of course, Tilman also mentioned at the beginning that mobility is quite responsible for quite a large chunk of carbon emissions. And if we can start here to really have an impact, I think it will be already quite a large impact if we really start to convert mobility into a more sustainable form. Well, we are already at the end. It's time flies. We have already 11 a.m. and we still have a few questions in the feed, but yeah, we will answer them in YouTube on the comment section. So we will definitely answer all of the questions that are there. Again, thanks for your time, everyone, and thanks especially for the audience for listening. It's great to see already so many people joining our first session, which is, of course, I think the reason is because we had such a great audience, such a great panel already for the first session. Thanks to you guys, and thanks for your insights, and would really be happy to have you in one of the following sessions again on board.
Thank you very much.
Thanks
for us. Thanks everyone. Bye-bye.
Yeah, it was a pleasure. Bye-bye.